I've gone places with Cole as a scene partner. It's just been magic. But I also have to say, working with Betty was incredible. And I have such a ball working with Titus. Titus, I say it's the gayest rodeo because Titus is just a comedic bombshell.
Hi, my name's Matthew Wexler. I'm with Queerty, and today we are talking Pride 50, our annual celebration of LGBTQ plus change makers from all walks of life. And I can't think of anyone that I would rather be having a conversation with than Broadway star Bianca Leigh. Hi, Bianca.
Hi, Matthew. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Happy Pride to you.
Happy Pride.
Yes, lots to be proud of. So there's so much I want to talk to you about. But first, for those who have been living under a rock or not in New York City, let's talk Oh Mary. Got my playbill. I have seen it 3 times. I saw it off Broadway downtown, and then I saw it when you
Oh,
all moved to the Lyceum, with Cole, and then I saw it with Betty Gilpin, so I feel like to close the loop, I need to come back and see Titus Burgess when he,
yes.
arrives. Yes. So for those not familiar with the show, in a little gem, can you give, our viewers a sense of what Oh Mary is, about? We know Mary Todd Lincoln, but it's through a very fun and wild lens.
Well, I would say it's an hour and a half of silliness and stupidity with a heart of gold and a touch of genius. People will be very pleasantly surprised because it's endless belly laughs. But within that, there's really some beautiful stuff that Cole has written and is performing. It is framed in the story of Mary Todd Lincoln in an alternative universe.
But with a
Um,
hoop dress still.
oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Right.
Hoop skirts galore. It was the hoop skirt summer last year when we opened. And Cole did no research whatsoever. But ironically, a lot of it touches on stuff that was actually happening. Abraham
Mhm.
Lincoln was getting letters saying, "Come get your wife. She's problematic."
Right, right.
Um,
And you play her, confidant, right?
I play her, companion.
Mhm.
In the original script, it specified Louise, my character, as being, Abraham Lincoln's cousin,
Oh,
and
interesting.
yes, I've been brought in to soften Mary's edges. Mary is very unfulfilled and very unhappy in the White House, and I would say in her marriage. She chose Abraham because he was sturdy and consistent, but she has made a mistake because he really doesn't love her, and, she longs for a life of artistic freedom, and I've been brought in to teach her the ways of a proper 19th century lady, needlepoint, doing watercolors, etcetera. And obviously Mary chafes under that. It's not what
Yes.
she wants. She wants
No,
to be
not
a
at all.
star.
She does, she does. She's quite petulant, right? I love how Sam Pinkelton, the director, has grounded all of you in it's so funny, but the stakes are so high, and you really feel that everybody's in it 110%. I read in a previous interview that you were shut out of mainstream entertainment for many, many years. I
Yeah.
can't think, at least theatrically, what is more mainstream than you showing up in Times Square and walking into a Broadway theater to do this gig 8 times a week. How does that feel?
It feels wonderful. It feels right. We kind of broke a pink ceiling. This is the type of play that would never have been allowed above 14th Street
Mhm. Because
because it's camp and it's gay and it's outrageous and gender is bent and uh, sacred tropes are bent. It's something that we started at the Lortel, and Lortel was a wonderful place for many, many years for avant garde downtown. camp, you know, the word camp has been so overused. It doesn't
Mhm.
really mean much anymore, but Cole definitely sees this as being very much in the tradition of and building on the shoulders of Charles Ludlam, Charles Bush,
Yes.
um, Everett Quinton, um, and then I think Cole has their own type of genius. And those were my idols in many, many ways. And Charles Bush is a dear friend. But to just classify it as camp is does not do it justice. But that, to answer your question, this is the type of show that would not, you know, and there have been comments, oh, it's funny, but it doesn't belong on Broadway. And opening night, when did the red carpet and did interviews, many of the interviewers were asking, how do you feel? Like, are people ready for this? Are
Mm.
people going to be shocked? And I kept saying, Mae West wrote a play in 1927 called Sex. There's always been adult entertainment, adult humor on Broadway, but, I think in many ways, something so queer and so joyous and so genre shattering. It was time. It was time. Overwhelmingly, people were ready.
I would agree. I would agree, and it is, obviously audiences because it moved from downtown to Broadway, been extended multiple times, lots of accolades, from, Tony Award nominations to, other off-Broadway, Drama Desk, etcetera, and, finalist for the Pulitzer Prize of Drama. Little hoity-toity, right? But that it's a
Hoity
very,
toity, fall, fall,
very
fall.
yes. Yeah, I mean, that says a lot, to your point about, the quality of the work, and this thread of queer legacy that ties it all together. I'd love to hear more, about your personal journey getting to this point. I saw your show Transvestigation that you did,
Oh
just for
my
one
god.
night at the Laurie Beachman, and we all thought it was gonna get shut down. Not your show, but the venue, right?
Yeah.
And that's been resurrected, which is exciting. You've worked with Taylor Mack, who's a,
Yes.
huge ally at Queerty. You were in Transamerica, which was nominated for an Oscar, and that's celebrating its 20th anniversary
2
this year.
Oscars, dear, 2 Oscars.
Too. Thank you for the correction. So you've really helped shape this kind of representation and entertainment. What changes have you witnessed in how trans stories specifically are told since you began your career?
Things are not always perfectly linear.
Mhm.
There've been little moments of clarity. Like I thought, there's a film, was it in the early '70s or the late '60s, called The Christine Jorgensen Story,
Mhm.
and I thought they did a pretty good job for the time. So as you can see in Laverne's documentary Disclosure, my dear friend Laverne Cox produced a documentary called, Disclosure. It's on Netflix, and it kind of takes you through the different decades, and I was so thrilled that she asked me to be a part of it. I was the '80s girl, and we talked about, different things, particularly Dressed to Kill, and I would just say that for many, many years, there were the tragic tranny, sad tranny, poor tranny ends up dead, um, which we are attacked physically, and we are murdered, but the idea that all of us have gone onto this tragic, futile, path that can only, land in disaster
Mm.
is grossly unfair and, obviously worked against the community because our enemies feed off that, you know, like a cancer tumor feeding off of sugar. They just, look,
Mhm.
see, 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 it doesn't work. And not telling the stories of the many, many trans women that transitioned and went on to lead lives that are happy, joyous, and free, and are
Right.
productive members of society and are successful and our family members and community members and volunteers and neighbors, those stories have not been traditionally told because and also trans men. But when I was coming up, there were very few trans men. Now, I think it's getting to be about 50-50. So shout out to my trans brothers.
Mhm.
But I tend to talk about the experience of trans women more because that's what I'm more familiar with.
Right.
Um, and I think it was just this constant butt of a joke, extremely mocking, cruel, condescending, patronizing, and pitying, and catastrophizing. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Catastrophizing, okay.
Bad things.
You know those words that you read all the time, but you almost never hear anybody say out loud?
Right.
That's one of them. Um, and, things have become a lot more subtle, and there's a lot more representation for, different types of stories.
Mhm.
And we're getting, more representations where, the story's not about someone's transition, or may not even be about the trans person themselves. They're one of the characters in a bigger story who happens to be trans. And
Right.
I think that's the dream of most actors of trans experience because we've lived it. We've gone, I am what used to be called a transsexual and is still called a transsexual. The transgender umbrella is big, and we've got a lot of sisters and a lot of brothers and a lot of siblings
Mhm.
and many different types of gender expression and identification. And, uh, but I am what has been called a transsexual. I went from A to Z in every way possible.
What part of your story specifically do you feel mainstream media has overlooked about the transgender experience? I love that you talk about the desire for nuanced and multidimensional characters. Is there something that you're craving to see either for you to be that creative presence and actor in a particular project, or something about your journey that you're just waiting to show up on film or television or stage?
Well, like I said, I mean, roles in which the character goes on post transition to lead a full life rather than forever, you know, transition is part of the story. That's the beginning of this story. What I don't see for trans characters is older trans characters who transitioned when they were younger. Most of the scripts that I get, young, beautiful trans woman, often of color, or old, white, has lived a male heterosexual life, has a wife and kids, and is just beginning transition. Now,
Hmm.
that is a story. That's Caitlyn Jenner. That is Transparent. Jeffrey Tambor in Transparent. But I can't remember a script where a character was a mature trans woman, attractive,
Uh-huh.
who transitioned when she was very young and lived the majority of her life post transition. You know,
Right.
that's
Is
a
that part
lot
of
of life
your,
experience.
inspiration, a little queer birdie chirp to my shoulder that you have an idea for a web series called Trans Cougar?
Yes, I started.
Yes,
I think it's good to work on your own material. And you saw Trans Investigation at the Beachman?
I did. It was so much fun. I went with a theater friend who's very familiar with your work and had, I think, seen something you had done with Taylor Mack maybe years ago.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's important to write your own stuff.
and I think your sister was there.
My
Does
sister
that
was there. My
Yeah.
sister and my niece were there. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I have a wonderful family. And, everyone always assumes, I guess that's changing, but for many years, people were like, how's your Your
Mm,
family. Like, my
right.
family's fine. My family's great. I mean, I
Yeah,
think the first couple of years were rough.
sure.
My poor mother thought I was going to be living under a bridge. It was
Mm,
unheard of in the early '80s, and I transitioned in a world where there were no job protections and, no protections of any kind in housing and employment, healthcare, nothing,
right.
but we wanted to transition, so we did, you know? God knows it's all being rolled back now.
Yes, which brings me to Pride, which is more important this year than ever. What kind of perspective do you have that might help LGBTQ individuals maintain their spirit of celebration during this particular Pride season?
Well, first, I would really like to thank, um, everyone outside of a major city, uh, that is trying to put on, uh, a pride celebration of any kind, in a smaller town. My heart goes out to you. I am so grateful. I've been spoiled. I live in New York City, and I'm ashamed to say I've taken it so much for granted. And those of us that live here, there's of course been many Pride Sundays where we roll our eyes and stay indoors and
Mhm.
shut the blinds because many, many, many people come in from outside of the city, the boroughs and Jersey and in many ways I've always felt that it was the parade was in many ways for them because they were coming in and they were coming from places where they couldn't be, for lack of a better word, so openly gay or
Mhm.
so openly queer. We used to joke that, there'd be young men coming in on the PATH train, and on the PATH train, they'd be, very macho. "How you doing?" And
Right,
then
right.
the minute they got up onto Christopher Street, it was like, you know, and I remember,
Code switching. Yeah, sort of like
exactly, and
changing.
I
Right.
remember, being in my 30s and 40s, we're hanging out, like, on a Saturday, and people are like, I mean, these kids, they're flying up and down Christopher Street and I'm like, "Look, when we first came to the city, it was flying out of us too, you
Yes.
know?"
Yes.
There is something really joyous to cleaning out, I'll tell you. It is an act of defiance,
Yes.
joyous defiance to be able to speak and to move and to bounce and to skip. All you want is just wonderful, you know? So I do remember that.
Yeah, I can almost see you reliving it in your mind, sort of going to that place, and I think it's joyful for all of us. Before we let you go, I want to circle back to "Oh Mary" because you just had me thinking about
Mhm.
bouncing and frivolity, and, you've talked about this connection that you have with Cole and your other
Oh,
stars on
yes.
stage and this eye contact, and it's so wild. I just wonder if you've had sort of like a Saturday Night Live moment where either of you have sort of like lost it or something so funny has happened that you've just sort of not be able to keep your composure in
Oh,
a professional
yes.
way, of course.
One was a couple times, in this scene where I'm doing the needlework, and I'm, just talking to her, and she's and Cole is sitting there glaring at me, and barking at me, and then I'm doing this, and a couple times I've looked, there's Cole glaring at me, and a couple times it made me start to laugh, and I catch myself, but I would
Right.
always tell myself, don't look. Don't look at Cole. Don't look at just look at the needle point. I have laughed. I've lost it. Cole has never lost. There were a couple times I thought we were both kind of laughing. I was like, wasn't it funny? We were laughing. Cole's like, no, no, I was in character.
I love that.
Like,
It really is the joy of live theater, you've got a room full of people and it's the experience and it's only happening once and it's never gonna be the same way
I love
twice.
it.
That's
And and
yeah.
and I just want to put a shout out that Cole is, I've gone places with Cole as a scene partner. It's just been magic. But I also have to say, working with Betty was incredible. It was a different type of Mary. It was more of a sisterly
Mm.
kind of thing. And I have such a ball working with Titus. Titus, I say, It's the gayest rodeo because Titus is just a comedic bombshell, and there's no use trying to contain that because that's exactly what the audience wants. I just love him. I think he's great.
Yeah, you're having an amazing time. Well, thank you
I am.
so much for joining us here at Queer Tea.
Thank you
Yes.
for selecting me. I've almost never been on any list. I think I was on, another magazine's, top trans actors or something like that, but this really is an honor, and I'm so excited to be recognized.